All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stupid versus Spread. I'm Alex. That's Mike. We're going to talk week 10. I'm sorry, week 11 college football, and then go into our week 12 picks. We'll start off with some very unfortunate and sad news. We like to start off with news like kind of around the league, if you will. UVA had three players killed in a shooting incident in which another former player was unfortunately, the suspect. I don't really have anything to add other than it's terrible that three young men died. And we're all praying and pulling for UVA as we kind of go forward. But Mike, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, it's just one of those. It's one of those moments that reminds you how fragile and precious life is, and that sometimes things are bigger than sports. And I thought it was really beautiful the way that the campus there has sort of rallied around that. I mean, not just the team, but around itself, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, if you've seen any of the pictures from their silent candlelight vigil, it's pretty heart wrenching. So it's just you know tough. It's awful. You obviously never want something like that to happen to anybody. But I think UVA has responded pretty tremendously, and everybody's praying for them going forward.
Yeah. So just wanted to acknowledge, everybody at UVA rooting for you. We hope the team's doing well. I know it's
Yeah,
probably
absolutely.
like in unlike imaginable like horrible time. So we'll move on from that. We just wanted to acknowledge it. I know we don't have a lot of viewers, but it's important to start off with the bigger than sports kind of stuff. On the other hand, we are going to talk college football playoff here. The playoff picture has become a little more secure. I think Mike, you would agree with that. Since we last talked last week, in my opinion, you're looking at really six or seven contenders here going out. So Oregon lost last week in pretty crushing fashion to Washington. USC is still in the hunt. LSU still in the hunt. Tennessee with one loss still in the hunt. But you have four undefeated teams. You have Georgia at number one, who has by far looked the best of any college football program. You have Ohio State number two. Michigan number three, and then TCU, who upset Texas this week at number four. And those are really the Power Five teams. There's no undefeated G5 team, so really no hope for any of them to make it. Even UCF, whose win over Tulane this past week kind of highlighted their prowess a little bit in the G5 arena. But of the essentially seven remaining, maybe eight or nine if you count Alabama and Clemson. But well, really, I don't think Alabama's in it, but
They're
counting
not.
Clemson, maybe. Um, I would make the argument that the picture we have now is the best picture that we're going to get, minus maybe USC if they can sneak in. But Mike, I want to revisit the conversation we had last week. Who do you think is going to be the top four? Because I've had time to think about this and I'm ready to declare something. I think not profound, but declare something.
So I still think we're all in a wait and see mode with TCU. And I think TCU is sort of a linchpin that begets a bigger conversation here because I think that there's a world where what the committee does really depends on whether or not TCU has a loss and whether or not this is the frustrating part is whether or not conference championships matter may
Mm-hmm.
depend on whether or not TCU has a loss. And that let me get through this point for a sec. So TCU
Okay.
goes undefeated and the rest of the results hold. You assume you have Georgia, Ohio State, or Michigan and TCU. So then your fourth team in is either Tennessee, a one loss USC, a one loss Michigan or Ohio State, and a one loss ACC champ. Those are the four teams that you would have remaining for that fourth spot. The problem the committee has is that while they would probably prefer to have Tennessee in that fourth spot based on their wins against Alabama and LSU, the is the committee willing to put them in to watch them play Georgia again in a game we already saw? Because you can't put them ahead of anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You can't put Tennessee ahead of an undefeated TCU to get them into a 2-3 matchup because it doesn't work that way. So
Right.
then I think the tendency has to be to say, okay, it's USC or it's the ACC champ or it's Michigan, and you paint the picture afterwards, just so you don't have a repeat matchup. But if TCU has a loss, now you can justify Tennessee being in that 3 spot if every other team in the picture has one loss. And so now Tennessee gets in at the 3. They play Ohio State, Michigan's winner. And then those, you have to decide between the palette of the other teams that you have remaining, which one of the one loss conference champs or the Ohio State, Michigan winner. I think it's really tough if Ohio State is that one loss team, because Ohio State would have lost a rivalry game at home knowing the stakes, and I think it's just tough to put them in. If it's Michigan and it's a really close game, it becomes a much more debatable conversation.
Hmm.
But then the committee's decision and the way that they assuage the final rankings to get the best matchups in the college football playoff, it becomes a lot easier than if TCU goes undefeated.
I don't disagree.
But
I
to answer your question on who I have, sorry, Georgia, Ohio State, TCU, and then I have USC as the fourth team. I think the same as I had last week.
Okay. I don't hate that you're staying like consistent. I don't think any of your teams that you've put in the final four have demonstrated that they're not worthy. I'm going to switch it up. I think I kind of said like I didn't know about TCU. After seeing TCU defensively kind of dominate what should have been like a very prominent Texas team, I don't know if Texas just like used all their muster to try and beat Alabama and just fell by one. But I'm ready to think that this TCU team really is college playoff contention caliber. Um, I didn't think it at first, but looking back on it, and I didn't hate them by any means, but looking back on it, they beat Oklahoma when we thought Oklahoma was good. They beat Texas or they beat Kansas in that highly sought out matchup early in the season. Then they moved on, beat Oklahoma State, who's still ranked. Then they beat another ranked team in Kansas State, and then moving on to West Virginia, Texas Tech, and then they beat Texas. I think they have a very, very good, a bet undefeated schedule that they have plowed through, and I think a loss to either Baylor or Iowa State wouldn't be the end of the world, and I don't think they'll fall to either of those teams. And then they'll go to the conference, final game. And really, if the committee says that it doesn't count, it really should not count for TCU. I think TCU should be in it. If you look at how the regular season fits with the rest of this, assuming TCU goes undefeated and assuming Georgia doesn't fall to, lesser teams, I think the best look we're going to get across the board, truly, if you're rooting for good football, would be Georgia number 1, TCU ranked 3, and then Ohio State and Michigan, whoever loses that matchup, going to number 4 while the other goes to number 2. In that case, you get Georgia playing Michigan or Ohio State, who's currently ranked 2 and 3, out of the matchup between the two teams, whoever lost in that, very sought after matchup. That's going to be a great game. So that's 1 and 4, and then 2 and 3 is the other, either Michigan or Ohio State. I've said it's going to be Michigan in number 2 slot, and then TCU at number 3. I think Tennessee's a great team. I don't see them hopping to number 3, so I don't want to see a Georgia-Tennessee matchup again, and I don't think LSU and I don't think USC, barring truly an LSU like massive upset in the SEC final, SEC championship game, I don't see any of them really coming out as a contender as opposed to TCU, who's currently undefeated, along with the rest of the 4 teams. I think it means more to have made it this far down the road. I'm not saying USC hasn't played great teams. I'm not saying they haven't had a hard schedule. I just think TCU has had an equally tough schedule, and Michigan and Ohio State are just better football teams. So I'd like to see those 4 currently in the top 4 make it, with the exception that I think whoever loses that Michigan Ohio State game flops with TCU, and then we play it out from there. That's my opinion. I know that's probably not a popular one, but
No, I like that logic. I do.
That,
I think
that assumes TCU doesn't lose 2 games in the regular season coming up, but I really don't think they will. I don't think they'll lose a single game, but even if they fall or stutter, do we want 2 SEC teams in either LSU or Tennessee and 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff, or do we want to let a USC team who hasn't been as dominant as Michigan and Ohio State over one of those teams, whoever loses? I think the answer is no. I don't think you want any of that. So in order to keep it balanced among the conferences and balanced among the teams that have played so far, I think you're looking at a very good picture of what we should be going with from here on out.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think when you look at it from who are the best teams in college football, I don't think I can make an argument that USC is necessarily better than Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you there. I just don't. Part of me thinks that the committee won't do that, and maybe it's just that in your scenario, we get the benefit of knowing that Michigan hasn't played Georgia, whereas Tennessee has. So you give Michigan, like let's say Michigan loses, you give Michigan the crack, especially if that game's a close game. Michigan loses it on the road. I think that's the best scenario because I think the biggest unknown right now in arguing for what you think should happen is that we don't know how far apart Ohio State and Michigan are, or
Right.
if they are even apart. Because you could say Ohio State struggled much more with Penn State, which is their most prevalent common opponent,
Mm-hmm.
which is fair, but also Ohio State went on the road. Michigan got them at home. So, and neither, the final scores ended up roughly similar. Now, Michigan looked much more dominant that entire game than Ohio State did. Ohio State didn't really turn it on until the end of the third quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but either way, you're sort of you're splitting hairs at that point. So we'll find
Right.
out on the field. But if that game is close, I think you have a real argument, especially if USC can't generate momentum to get them to the final ranking with some sort of style points that say, look, Ohio or USC is poised to give everybody else in the field, for the playoff an actual
Mm-hmm.
problem. And they have the potential to do that. Whether or not they're actually able to do it is a different story because they have an offense that not only because you can my counter argument to what you're saying is you put Michigan in. Why would we not? Or let's say it's Michigan. Ohio State is a little bit different because their strength is their offense. But if it's Michigan, you say, what? How is it different than what we got out of Georgia, Michigan last year? And the answer is probably it's not that different because Georgia's offense is better. Georgia's defense is worse, but Michigan's offense is probably still not going to put up a strong fight against Georgia's defense based on what they did to Tennessee.
That's fair.
USC has the chance, right? It's not guaranteed at all because we saw what Georgia did to Tennessee, but at least you have a quarterback and a set of wide receivers who could actually challenge Georgia's defense. So if you look at it that way, there may be an argument to put USC in if they can accrue the style points to get them there. I don't know that they necessarily do that the way that they've looked already. So I think you have a strong case. I think there's certainly a realistic possibility that we end up with 2 Big Ten teams in the college football playoff, which everybody in the Big Ten loves the idea of that happening because
Yeah, the real redux of what the SEC has done over the course of the past 5 years,
yeah,
6 years.
yeah, and especially with USC and UCLA coming into the conference, as long as the UCLA Board of Regents actually approves their, merger to the Big Ten, it sets them up in a position to say, no, we are as good as the SEC,
Yeah,
and can be. So it's very interesting from a power dynamics as as you look at where the sport actually goes and how we end up in 2 mega conferences and what's the end game for college football. I think having 2 Big Ten teams in the CFP would be really interesting.
yeah, and I'll say this: and this is so specific, but we are a somewhat gambling show. If the point spread in that Michigan Ohio State game is greater than 3, and I don't think it will be, but if it's like anywhere between 3 and 7, for either side, and that side covers, I don't think you have an argument to leave either two teams out. Like if this is within a touchdown game, regard let's disregard the spread. Maybe I'm just speaking
Yeah,
in those terms.
maybe we just need
But if
to.
that's within a touchdown, that game is within a touchdown. Neither of those teams should be discredited from being in the college football playoff because of that one loss. Because at that point, you don't have four teams without a loss. So I don't know. That's my opinion.
No, I think that's fair.
All right. Well, let's get to our games. So we're gonna try and keep it a shorter show this week. We have a tendency to drag on. So, first game we'll talk about five games like we always do, and then we'll go into our picks. First game we'll talk about Illinois and Michigan. Michigan is -18. Over under is 42. Noon kickoff. Michael, I'll let you go first.
I'm not touching this game. If you put a gun to my head, I would say I think I like Illinois here, and maybe that's just me being like you could say I'm a Michigan hater,
Hmm.
um, but I think that Michigan only has they're starting to look towards the end of the road. You would assume that some people in their coaching staff are already prepping for Ohio State, as they have been all year. They know what this boils down to. Illinois, on the other hand, doesn't really have anything left to fight for. They've lost to Purdue. They need a Purdue loss against either um, Northwestern or Purdue. I think their last game is against Indiana. So Illinois needs help to get into the Big Ten championship game. But
Right.
no matter what, none of it matters if Illinois can't win this game against Michigan. I don't think they do. Don't get me wrong, but I think that Illinois is going to lay everything they have out. Brett Bielema is a good enough coach to make this difficult for John Harbaugh, and I think that Michigan may start getting into a look ahead syndrome here. I think Michigan. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, Michigan still wins this game. I just think that 18 is a lot to cover. So if you were asking me what I would play Illinois with the points. But I'm not touching either the spread of the total here.
I don't hate that. I lean the over here. I really don't have a play for it either. I think Michigan can score a lot of points here. Illinois doesn't have a bad passing offense. They just can't run the ball that well. Michigan's defense is pretty damn good, but I I see a world in which Michigan covers this, but I think regardless of what happens, this game goes over 42 points. It's pretty low scope, pretty low total for any college football game. My only concern is that it's supposed to be 26 degrees with 17-mile-an-hour winds. Um, so I don't have a play. I think the over is possible, if not probable, given Illinois' running offense and Michigan's basically prolific offense. But I don't have a play for this either. We'll move on to TCU at Baylor. Baylor's +2.5. Over unders 57.5. Noon kickoff. What do you got for this one, Mike?
If you would have asked me a week ago, I would have told you I love Baylor in this spot.
Oh, what
Um,
happened in the interim period?
yeah. Not only did TCU put up a very impressive performance against Texas, but Baylor kind of laid an egg against. They played Kansas State, right?
Yes, played Kansas State and lost 3-31.
Yeah. So,
Woof.
yeah, not great, Bob. So I think you back off from Baylor just for that. I think you have to start giving TCU some credit and just not fading them. Um,
100% agree.
yeah. So I don't know that I like it enough to take TCU here, just because it feels like when does TCU start looking towards the finish line psychologically? Does it happen this week? Does it happen next week? Does it happen at all? Are they able to really block it out and take it game by game? Does that creep in, or is Sonny Dykes a good enough coach that he can keep his guys focused every week? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, but I'm not willing to really risk it here. I think this is a sit back and honestly, I don't even know if you need to watch this game. Just maybe keep the score alerts on, and if
Yeah,
this
have it
looks
on the smaller TV.
yeah, exactly. If this looks close in the middle of the second quarter, that's when you start paying attention to it, just to see if there's going to be possibly an upset. But I don't really think that there's a play here either way.
So I will disagree with you on this. I actually have two plays. I will take TCU minus 2.5. I think you're too far down the schedule with too much at stake to overlook Baylor and how they've played previous to last week. I think both teams can score, and I think TCU can pull it out minus 2.5, which is why I'm also taking the over 57.5. I actually probably will parlay these two as opposed to taking single bets on each. But I think both these teams can score a decent amount of points. My only worry is that they're neither are accustomed to 45-degree weather in Texas, and this is a Texas versus Texas kind of game. But the wind shouldn't be too bad, so I really don't hate TCU in this spot with the points or against the points rather. We'll move on. This game we've only picked because of the total, so we'll talk about that because I think Mike and I both have the same play, but it's Iowa at Minnesota. Minnesota's -3. The over/under in this game, college football game, is 32.5, which is insane. Which is why I'm taking the under. Mike, I'll let you speak on this one.
I am also taking the under because it's so absurd that you have to take it.
If you had,
Have
you could, yeah. If you had a 32.5 over under in cold weather in an NFL professional football game in prime time on Thursday night, you still would be like, that's not enough points for an over under spread. And this is a college football game on a Saturday. Someone knows something. This game reeks of going under in such an egregious fashion that you have to take it.
so I don't know that I've figured it out, but I think here's the calculation. The high on Saturday in Minneapolis is 16. It's an outdoor stadium. Wind is expected at 16 miles an hour, and there's a 40% chance of snow. Even if it doesn't snow, it might be the most miserable college football experience that you could possibly imagine. Um,
Not to mention, this is the Iowa Hawkeyes, who have once in
yeah,
12 weeks shown us they have a competent offense.
yes. So, and I love Minneapolis. Shout out Dinkytown. I love the University of Minnesota. I I am going to, with that being said, take Iowa with the points and the under, only because you expect this game to be 5-3, and I will
Yeah,
take
no, it would.
I will
It
take
wouldn't
the
shock me if it
underdog.
was 4-0.
Yeah, I will take the underdog in this game, just because there's not going to be enough points to clear the spread for the favorite. So give me give me Iowa and the under. I will be placing those in Virginia, as it is illegal in North Carolina. But
I was I was gonna say at first I was like, "There's no way they score enough points for +3 to matter because this looks like a field goal game." But one of these two teams will be getting a safety. I might bet just single handedly that one of these teams will get a safety.
yeah, I wonder what the odds are on anytime safety
Oh,
in
it's
this
got to
game.
be higher or lower than it should be because no one in their right mind doesn't think that it's
Is it
possible in
like
this
plus?
game.
It has to be the highest odds for an anytime safety, like the most even odds for an anytime safety bet in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
history.
it's probably like +250. You're like, what
I was
the
thinking
fuck?
like plus 175.
I don't disagree. I'm gonna find those odds and I'm gonna bet them.
I'll look them up. You keep doing the host thing. I'll follow.
Okay. Okay. We'll move on. USC at UCLA, 8 p.m. kickoff. So we have transitioned to a very late night kick, as well as our next game. UCLA is +1.5, over under 75.5, much like the previous discussion point. So I like USC in this position a lot. I think 1.5 points. You're basically talking to pick 'em, unless you really think USC is only going to win by a point. So I will be taking USC -1.5 in this spot. I also don't hate the over. Both these teams can score a shit ton of points. 75.5 is egregiously high, but every time that you have a line like this, it's almost so much fun to take it because you'll know right away basically by the end of the first quarter whether this bet will hit or not. So I lean the over 75.5. I know that sounds so stupid, but I will be taking USC minus 1.5. I'll defer to you, Michael.
I'm also taking USC minus 1.5. I don't really I get USC is not looked as impressive as they did to start the year through their Pac-12 schedule. I still think that they have the offense to beat everybody in the Pac-12. And this is a game I mean, every game they have to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. But I
Right.
think,
This is a hungry dogs run faster kind of discussion.
yeah, but they need a signature win. This is a rivalry game. They'll be going into at the Rose Bowl, and UCLA, I think, is supposed to have their largest student section in the history of their program at this game, and they've sold, I think, 47,000 tickets. And that's like, yeah, again, I don't care. Caleb Williams has played in more intimidating environments. He has won in more intimidating environments. USC is going to be geared up for this game, and I feel like they come out and they win at least by 2. I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
and go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say I wouldn't be surprised if this game is close all the way through, but I think USC might win by a touchdown or more, just because I think that this is sort of UCLA's last stand. They haven't been particularly good at home this year. They lost to Arizona and almost got beat by something called the University of South Alabama. So I like USC in the spot.
Yeah, and if you just look at the spread math, I know that's like such a stupid thing to say, but if you look at the spread math, right, like this game could go to overtime, and then it's literally a pick 'em based on who wins. Like 1.5 points in college football doesn't mean fucking shit. Pardon my
Yeah,
French. Like you're basically betting. This is basically a pick 'em. That's why I laugh when it's like, oh, this college football team's -1. It's like, okay, so either you push or you win when they win. It's just a money
yeah.
line pick with better, like less vague. Like that's all it means. Um, so yeah, I agree. USC in within California, both these teams. It's like TCU Baylor playing or Baylor Texas playing or like any inter like state rivalry is so funny to say like, oh, like this is a home game. It's like, is it? Because a lot of times it comes down to what team is more willing to travel, and the team that's more willing to travel is the team that's doing better. That's USC in this case. We'll go to our final game that we talk about, Utah at Oregon. So we got a little Pac-12 love talking about the last two games. Utah is +3 at Oregon, who got smoked last week by Kansas State, who was at one time ranked. Over under 61.5. This has a bright early morning kickoff at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. Mike, I defer to you.
Yeah, a little burning the midnight oil on this one. I like the over here, 61.5.
Okay.
This game feels like a knockdown drag out because the only both of these teams only have one thing left to play for, and that's the opportunity to make the Pac-12 championship game to
Yep.
spoil USC season.
Yeah.
So
Basically. Yeah.
that's it. That's all they got is that, and then if they win that, they get a Rose Bowl berth. Um, so with that being said, I think this one's going to be a war. I think both offenses can score. Oregon can't play defense. We saw that against Washington.
Correct.
And Utah can't play defense against high-powered offenses. We saw that against UCLA. Plus, Utah goes on the road to Oregon, where Oregon has still not stopped anybody. So I think this game is in the 30s for both teams. I think they're trading touchdowns at the end of the fourth quarter. I don't really know who wins, but I like the over here.
I agree. I don't see why Oregon's favored. Even if you think like how reactionary betting can be about the previous week, Oregon -3 after what Kansas State did is pretty egregious. I think Utah's straight up a better team. I'm probably going to sprinkle Utah money line, but I do like the over 61.5 here pick, just because like the way either of these teams win is probably a shootout given their defenses. So I just think, you know, 61.5, you're talking about 30 points each before you push to the over. So I like over 61.5 here as well. Mike, give me the rest of your picks.
So I haven't been able to find this Iowa Minnesota anytime safety prop. I've been looking everywhere. I can't find it.
Let me do some research while you get your picks out. Let's see if we can find one.
Okay, so I have Minnesota plus 27.5 against Ohio State. I think this is a name association game more than uh, the actual results on the field as far as this line goes. Because we've talked about all year how Maryland's not terrible. They didn't look good last week, don't get me wrong, but um, I think that they have the chops to compete in this game at home. This feels like you take, like I said, lean Illinois against Michigan as they start to get closer to the Ohio State Michigan game. I think this is the same logic here, except this time Maryland is actually at home. They have a quarterback who can keep them in this game in Talia. So even if Ohio State goes up big, that doesn't necessarily mean you've lost the pick here. So I like Maryland to try to keep it within 4 touchdowns. Um, Miami plus 19.5 against Clemson. I still don't believe in Clemson. Clemson sort of righted the ship against a very not great Louisville team. I think Miami has not a whole lot to play for. This is the toughest game remaining on their schedule. I think that they get up for this game and at least keep it within the number. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one where in the 3:30 slate you look at the third quarter and Miami's actually leading somehow,
Mm-hmm.
um, because Clemson's not. We've said it all year. They have not been the team that everybody thought they would be. So I'd be surprised if Clemson really comes out and dominates this game by 3 touchdowns. I like Miami to keep it inside the number. We talked about Iowa plus 3 and the under there. That's going to be so much fun to watch. UNC, I will always ride my guys, but UNC, the only way that they keep their playoff hopes alive is winning and winning big. Drake May is a Heisman candidate, and we need to talk about it because he is a Heisman candidate. He should be in New York for the final vote. He's playing out of his mind. Georgia Tech is bad. Their season is lost. And UNC showed the ability to blow teams out at home when they played Pitt and Virginia Tech. I think they do it again. I'll be on the field for the Veterans Day posthumous honorees. Not Memorial Day esque posthumous, but posthumous in that Veterans Day was
It
last
was
week.
2 fucking weeks ago.
Yeah, but but UNC was on the road, so this is their military appreciation game. But I like them minus 21. Not, I wouldn't go crazy with it, but I like them minus 21. Tennessee minus 21.5. No spread is too big for Tennessee, and I don't get why South Carolina is only a 3 touchdown dog when they went to Florida last week and got absolutely demolished by a team that's not very good. Hand up, I was totally wrong on South Carolina plus 7.5. I'm not going to do it again. Tennessee minus 21.5. Talked about USC minus 1.5. UAB at LSU, they are catching 14.5 points. I like UAB. Um, I have said this about LSU that they're too highly ranked in the playoff. I think they won a big emotional game against Bama, but I think the results of the rest of their season show up. They got up for that game, not necessarily that they can play up to that the entire year. They'll be in a look ahead spot towards the end of the year. Sorry, as they get ready for the Pac or the SEC championship game, and they get Texas A&M next week, I believe. So I don't see them covering this spread here. I think UAB keeps it within 2 touchdowns, and then we talked Utah Oregon over 61.5.
I love it. So I have TCU minus 2.5 over 57.5 in that game. I like to parlay that, please and thank you. Iowa, Minnesota under 32.5. That's just a fun bet. Anytime I see anything under like 35 on a college football game, and there have been multiple, it's so much fun to take the under and just be like a degenerate or true degenerate. We talked about USC minus 2 and Oregon, Utah over 62.5. Thursday night, instead of professional football, we're going to go college. I like Tulane at home, minus 3. Um, Tulane had a pretty crushing loss to UCF, where they allowed a ridiculous amount of rushing yards. I think 400 or 500 plus. SMU does not have that kind of run game. Tulane is still a two-loss team in the hunt for the AAC and possibly a really good bowl game if they become the highest-ranked G5 team, which any team coming out of the AAC and winning will be if you're talking bowl games. So Tulane's hopes very much still alive. They are technically tied with UCF and Cincinnati. They need to beat SMU in order to continue on to next week. If they beat Cincinnati that week and UCF wins out, they will play a rematch in the AAC final championship game. I like Washington State -4 against Arizona at Arizona. Arizona is not a great team. There's a couple like key injuries from Arizona that have plagued them all year. Their defense is okay, their offense is okay, but there's nothing that suggests to me that Washington State shouldn't win by a touchdown over Arizona. So I'm going to take Arizona in this case. Houston at East Carolina. East Carolina, a bad team, but Houston's laying 6 points +6. I'm going to take Houston +6. They have not been great this year, but I still like Dana. I still think he's a great coach. They haven't covered in like 4 games, so I think they're kind of due if you talk about regression to the mean. And I think their offense can score a lot. So seeing 6 here kind of confuses me because I think they have something like 31 passing touchdowns, which is pretty great considering they're 12 weeks into the season, really 11 with a bye. They have great red zone efficiency, great third and fourth down efficiency. So I like Houston here laying 6 points. I don't think East Carolina beats them by a touchdown. Penn State -19. Rutgers is not great. Penn State kind of a low-key powerhouse. I think this is a 4 to 5 touchdown game. I don't see why the line is +19. So I'm going to take Penn State -19. And then I'm going to go with a late one that might surprise a few people. I'm going to take Colorado State +22 at Air Force at 8 p.m. Air Force is good, but not that good. Air Force is like academy good. Colorado State sucks, but they don't suck that much where they're going to lose to an academy. At least not by 3 touchdowns. I don't see why this line is so high. Air Force doesn't have a passing game. Colorado State does. Colorado State doesn't have a rushing game. Air Force does. But they're kind of even across the board after that. So really you're just betting that Air Force isn't going to cover by 3+ touchdowns by the time they run out the clock, quite literally. So I like Colorado State +22. The over-under is 44, so what that tells you is basically that like they don't think that Colorado State will score more than a touchdown or 2, and I don't think that'll be the case. They'll be on primetime-ish, Fox Sports 2, so like if they want to show out, they can. I think they come out and show out. Mike, anything to add?
No, go Heels.
All right, well, that has been our show. Thanks for watching. Tune in this week for our NFL talk. We'll probably have a lot to talk about this coming week. And thanks for watching, and like and subscribe.